before the internet and smartphones, it was citizen band radio that grabbed my attention. Although legalized in the UK in 1981, FM, I had used the then illegal AM band as an introduction to the airwaves. Being a shy teenager, it opened the door to a social circle of people that I could safely engage with on my own terms. After some time, I soon realized that all of my friends were on the CB, that I'd actually narrowed my social circle to those people with a handle. One day you could be talking to someone, often through the early hours of the morning, then a complete stranger comes in and introduces themselves. Unlike the internet, you had a human voice to communicate with on the CB, a realism that is lacking from just text chatting. You were able to know the personality within the first few minutes of talking. Walking down any street in my hometown, I could recognize many CB antennas, and could often associate them with their operators over time. Some belonged to large families that all used the radio as a way to keep in touch with their friends and family, often forming small clubs for gathering socially. Most towns had a breakers club that met at least once a month, or sometimes fortnightly. Whilst talking to a friend just around the corner, late one night, a voice said, "On the side." We let him into the conversation, both intrigued as to who it might be. He introduced himself as Steamboat, and for a couple of hours the three of us exchanged stories. It was around 4 a.m., and we were just calling it a night, when Steamboat asked us both round to his house for a coffee. We both agreed, and my friend picked me up to go and have an eyeball with him. This was commonplace back then, although at 4 a.m. perhaps not so common. I remember entering his living room and seeing the large oxygen tank at the back of his chair. He made us both a coffee and proceeded to tell us more of his old war stories. Running around in a forest without any bullets trying to escape from enemy soldiers. Laying in a hospital bed with no wall at the end of the ward because a bomb had hit the hospital the night before. It's so amazing to hear stories like these firsthand, instead of from books. Then came the original reason for our visit. He'd promised to show us a card trick, the usual pick a card and put it back in the pack. Okay, we thought, let's just play along. To our amazement, the exact card was in an envelope behind a clock on the mantelpiece. It was quite an unexpected highlight to the visit. As a side note, he had been making a scale model of the HMS Victory, Nelson's flagship, handmade from the intricately carved hull, down to the cannons and rigging. He mentioned that he didn't have a decent view of the rear of the ship in order to finish it. By sheer coincidence, I had a set of 12 prints of the ship that my sister had given to me from when she was in the Navy. I happily passed these on to him, knowing that it would help him to complete the model. Thankfully, he did finish building it, prior to his passing some months later. This is just one example of quite a few encounters that I had through the CB. I'm sure there are many people in their 30s to 60s, and perhaps older, that made similar connections around the same time period. The social interactions, even for someone as unsociable as myself, were very commonplace. You could get a feeling about the type of person you were talking to, or could listen in on conversations and choose whether to participate or not. Sure, there were still egos, but you could just be who you are and mostly were accepted. Asking for a radio check was often a method used as a conversation starter, besides the 19 for a copy call, formally asking for someone to speak to. During many of the long nights, I'd got into the habit of keeping a logbook of contacts by the radio, something which is adopted by radio amateurs. That's when I started up my own network. I'd sit on a channel with a couple of friends, announcing every few minutes that if there were any long-distance stations able to pick us up, then come in and we'd try and get some long-distance copies. Many times, this would just be a dozen or so people, which was okay by itself. But at the weekend, it could get quite busy. I had to limit each exchange to just a brief signal and audio check and a few minutes of chat, but several times we reached 60 to 70 people on the same channel, which we'd list in order and ask each person who they'd like to speak to. From the central United Kingdom area, we would often speak to southern Scotland, South Wales, the south coast of England and into Devon, which would equate to over 100 miles. It became a regular occurrence, and most found it exciting just to talk across great distances. Seeing that CB was only designed for a 10-mile radius, it became appealing to all ages and walks of life. We also developed the network phenomenon into a way of raising money for charity, offering several 24-hour sponsored modulations, along with organizing jumble sales and events for local causes in need. Thinking back, it was absolutely amazing how much people were willing to donate, both money and their time. I would say that it gave people a very good sense of community. With the advent of mobile phones and the internet, CB radio quite quickly became obsolete. Apart from a few operators that went on to amateur radio, the local CB activity ceased to exist. With the passing of each technology, Citizens Band Radio in particular, I feel that we've lost some degree of proper human connections, particularly on a local community level, with the world quickly becoming a much smaller place.